Okay, I'm just going to get started with a little bit of an intro for those of you that have never met me before. My name is Ellie, and I'm the founder and the head educator and the bag pattern designer here at Klum House. And Klum House is definitely started as a passion project, and now it's grown into quite a robust line of patterns. So I'm super excited and proud of that. Over the years, I've taught sewing to, at this point, I feel like thousands of people. Klum House started as an in-person workshop, sewing workshop brand. And then when COVID hit, we really took a lot of stuff online. We focused a lot more on selling bag making materials and kits through a new website that we launched during COVID. So we've had a lot of transition over the years, but I'm doing a big push this year to get back in front of folks through these virtual workshops and live streams. So it was really fun to set this up and definitely had some technical hurdles. So I'm hoping that with the 2 camera angles that I have set up, I can actually show you all some techniques in real time. So that would be awesome. So this workshop I put together because I really wanted to share some tips and tricks on working with wax canvas, working with leather, working with rivets, and sort of what it means to make heavy duty bags at home. So for those of you that don't know, Klum House patterns, like say even this bag right here, this is the Portsmouth tote, and this is our beginner pattern. So all of our bags are made on home sewing machines, and all the leather is attached with rivets. So a lot of the machines that I teach on are really basic mechanical machines. So I'm just here in my filming studio. I'll pull this up. I'm actually gonna push the camera down a little so you guys can see this just a little bit better. How about that? Hopefully it will decide to focus on this. So this is a pretty, I want to say, entry-level mechanical sewing machine. Singer heavy duty, super easy to find, probably $200, $300 retail price point. Not a big machine to say, oh my gosh, like huge investment or anything. Like honestly, you could get a machine even at a thrift store and make bags just fine. But I like to really make sewing accessible. So with the mechanical machine, there's a few stitches, not a ton. We usually just use a straight stitch or a zigzag. And there's not a lot of fancy things going on. There's no computer in here. It's all mechanical. So I have sewn on a ton of different machines and really fancy machines as I travel and teach. But bags can be made on pretty much any home sewing machine that you have. Now there's gonna be some caveats to that. Let me talk about, this is the Maywood tote pack. So this is a tote bag and it's also a backpack. So in order to sew something with this heavier duty fabric, you're going to need to set your machine up for success. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too. So my hope is we have an hour, maybe a little bit more with Q&A, that we can go over wax canvas and sort of talk a little bit about that, and go over leather and talk a little bit about that, and then talk about rivets too, because all the bags that I design, you attach leather handles, but they're attached with rivets. So we're able to get leather onto the bag, but not have to sew through it. Now, I know that a lot of people want to learn how to sew leather, and sewing leather is really fun. You start to really push your home sewing machine beyond its limits if you're sewing with leather. And different weights of leather can do that. So hopefully we'll have time to get into that. But I kind of just wanted to touch on a lot of different things, and mostly materials, to really paint this bigger picture of how we sew such professional looking bags on home sewing machines. So first of all, let's talk about machines a little bit more. Now, I already showed you the Singer Heavy Duty. There's a few different models, 4420 stitches are included in that model. The other machine that I like to sew on is the Janome HD 1000. And honestly, these two machines that I'm showing you are older machines. Like, they're not the newest model. They haven't just come out with them. I don't keep up with that a ton. And part of that is because once you have a machine that works, you just keep it and you keep using it. And a lot of times you make it work, right? So I just want to point out that about those two machines. Like, I'm sure Janome has an HD line that has some newer, fancier machines that are probably really great for bag making too. But when it comes down to it, all sewing machines are built the same way, right? And the stitch is a pretty simple thing. It's essentially a top thread and a bottom thread, and they're looping around each other in order to make the stitch. And I know that this is maybe a little more basic than what some of you expected, but understanding the core ways that the machine is designed to make a stitch work really well will help you understand how to sew heavy duty things on your sewing machine. So I'm actually going to switch over and show you in detail a little bit and talk about a stitch, and then we can talk about the sewing machine. Now, if you've never sewn before, some of this stuff might be hard to follow because the terminology might be new, but the concept you'll be able to understand. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at that. So I hope you all can see this detail of this canvas here. But what I have here is a straight stitch, 2 pieces of canvas, and the top thread is orange and the bottom thread is black. And the reason that I made these 2 threads different colors is because I actually want you all to see, and I hope you can. I was hoping that this camera angle would help us get there. I want you all to see these loops right here. So let me know if you all can see those loops in between the layers here. So the orange loop and the black loop. The orange loop is the thread on top and the black loop is the thread on the bottom. And I know everyone's like, yeah, we know this, right? But what I want to point out is that you don't see the loops on the bottom or on the top because they're designed to be hidden. And that's what makes the strong stitch, is if the top thread and the bottom thread are able to loop around each other and more or less hide the loops in between the layers of fabric, whether it's 2 layers, 4 layers, 6 layers, you shouldn't see those loops. When you start to see them, as I pull on this black thread, you can kind of see that orange thread pop up there. You start to see the loops there. Well, that's me pulling really hard on the black thread, is me mimicking as if the machine had too much tension there, or if the orange thread had too loose of tension. So the sewing machine is always trying to keep this dynamic tension as it sews a stitch between the top and the bottom thread. So it's almost like there's a tug of war going on, but both sides are tugging at the right force to keep those loops centered in there, and that's what makes a strong stitch. Now, let's talk about one other thing. These loops are happening because as the needle goes up and down through the fabric, there's a hook rotating around the bobbin that is catching the thread in the needle as it rotates around. So the idea is, as the needle goes up and down, when the needle goes down to this exact spot, the bobbin hook comes around and it loops the thread that was in the needle. And that's how the loop is made. So in order for that to happen, your machine has to keep a certain amount of what's called timing. Okay, and if the timing is off, you get a skipped stitch because you don't get a loop. Or you get shredded thread, or you get broken thread. Okay, so let me jump back on camera here. So the reason I explained that in so much depth is when we're using our sewing machine to sew heavy duty things like canvases and wax canvases, we're compromising the machine's ability to keep tension and timing optimal for it to make the strongest stitch possible which is what the machine is designed to do. Now, I know that whole sentence is a total mouthful, but if you're sewing thick fabric, so let's talk about just layers of fabric. We'll get into a little bit more about wax canvas and canvas in a little bit, but let's just talk about layers of fabric. Okay, so say I'm sewing, I don't know, 4 layers of wax canvas and 4 layers of lining here. And I go along here. This is harder for the machine to feed through versus if I was just sewing 2 layers. The feed dog and the power that is going through the machine to move the feed dog through, it has a harder time pulling thick fabric through. Well, when that happens, you're compromising the timing. So the timing of the feed dog and the needle going up and down, the needle is slower to puncture through heavier fabric, which is why we want to set ourselves up with the right needle, like a denim needle or a nonstick needle. And Anna can put links to those in the chat so you can see what I mean. But we want to set the machine up for success. So we want to help it go through thick layers so it doesn't lose tension and it doesn't lose timing. Well, there's a few different things we can do on the machine to do that. One of them is to actually use the hand wheel when you're sewing. So as you go through something that's really thick, you can turn the hand wheel and that manually sews. So that actually lets you exert more force on the needle penetrating into the fabric, and you're controlling it a little bit more. Now, sometimes that doesn't always work, but it's a obvious and good trick, and sometimes people don't know that it's possible. Another thing that we do is, and I have so many tools I brought out here for you. Now I don't know where it is. Well, I'll have Anna put that in chat too, is you can add a walking foot attachment to your machine. And what that does is it adds a little bit of extra feed from your presser foot. It turns your presser foot into something that helps feed the fabric through. So if you follow my logic from what I was talking about earlier, then that starts to make sense because you're trying to get the machine to keep tension and timing. So of course, if you're going to add some other element that's going to help the machine feed through, not just the feed dog, then it's going to help the machine keep timing and tension. You're going to have a better, easier time stitching heavier fabric. Okay, another thing that we'll do is when the machine goes from a couple layers of fabric onto thicker fabric, it doesn't love to jump up those layers, right? So the tension on the machine is kept really well if the presser foot is flat. So when I'm teaching beginners how to sew bags, sometimes we're sewing some really thick things, and sometimes the stitch we need to sew is starting on a thick layers of fabric, like sometimes 8 layers of fabric. So I always have people start on the fabric at least a ½ inch onto the fabric, set the needle in so that the presser foot is flat. Then you can catch that ½ inch on the back stitch, right? So if the presser foot is at an angle, there's another tool we use. It's called the Gina-majig, and I'll have Anna put that link in there. And it helps the machine, what I always like to say is climb the mountain. So if you're going from 2 layers to 6 layers, it will flatten the presser foot. Now, I do have some videos for free on my YouTube channel that show how to use these, and we'll retrieve them in a little bit for you. Okay, so I hope that like small intro to how the machine is designed to function to make the optimal stitch can stay in your brain as we go and you learn how to sew and you do more sewing projects, and you can be like, okay, the stitch is skipping, or the thread is shredding, or it just won't sew, right? Because one of the number one questions I get is, can my machine sew that? Can my machine sew that? Well, I just told you how to answer that question. Your machine can sew it if your machine can get a good stitch sewing through it. And I'm like, okay, am I talking in riddles at this point? Well, hey, what makes a good stitch? Optimal tension and optimal timing. How do you set your machine up for success with that? You help it sew through those thick parts by having a clean and fresh needle, okay? And actually I've been really into nonstick needles lately because they work really good with the wax canvas, and they help the needle have less friction going through thicker fabrics. They're also a little bit thicker than the regular needles. So that helps. Putting a walking foot on, using a Gina-majig, using the hand wheel, and then being able to just observe when is the machine about to go over a bunch of layers and drop down again. So is it changing levels? Well, you don't want to sew really fast through that part, right? So another thing we do, especially with the bag patterns that I design, is we try to design the sequence of construction, so the way that you make the bag, so that you never sew through thicker layers than what a home sewing machine can handle. Now, I'm talking a lot about home sewing machines, and you're welcome to ask questions at the Q&A part after my lecture about industrials, because a lot of what I said is true for industrials, but you can push them a lot further. The main difference between an industrial machine and a home sewing machine is the size of the motor. The bigger, more robust sewing machines tend to be industrials. They have really big motors which are attached to tables, which is why a lot of times you see industrial sewing machines attached to tables. Home sewing machines have smaller motors. The motors are just in the head of the machine, so they can only handle so much. The more powerful the motor, the more power you have to sew, the thicker fabrics and materials you can sew through. Okay, so that's the logic behind the question, can my machine sew that? The best way to know is to try. Try sewing it on your machine. Now, don't floor the pedal to the metal to do it, but observe the stitch, you know? So with bag making, there are so many different approaches, the same way that there is so many different approaches to sewing anything and making anything for that matter. I really love to use things that are very commonly found, that are not hard to get as far as the basics. Now, it's different when we get into the world of tools, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But I usually sew bags with all-purpose thread. I find all-purpose thread to be the strongest thread. It's easy to find. You usually have it sitting around and it works great. I also like to sew with a denim 100 needle or a top stitch 90 or 100. Okay, so those are just the ones that we sell on our site. All the supplies we sell are the ones that I just like to sew with or that I teach with, and they're usually pretty universal as far as bag making goes. All right, so because I don't want to take up too much time about sewing machines, we could talk forever about machines. We all love them. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about fabric. So our favorite bag making fabric is waxed canvas. And I'm going to pull this Oberlin tote down off the wall so I can talk about it. So this is the Oberlin tote made out of berry and slate blue, which are two discontinued colors. And there's two pockets here, pocket on the inside. I just want to orient you all to what I'm showing you. And this is made out of wax canvas with no lining, okay? Let me take the filler out here. And you can see right away that it stands up on its own, right? And it doesn't even have a lining. Now, structure is something that we tend to really want in bags when we're bag making. And we get really great structure from the extra layers of pockets on the outside of the bag, but then also just the thickness of the fabric, okay? So waxed canvas is literally canvas fabric, cotton canvas fabric, that wax has been imbued into the weave, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my other camera so we can look at it a little more closely. So this is our spring green wax canvas. And I just want to show you when I crinkle this up, you can see every single fold that just happened because of the wax. And especially it's like a little colder right now because it's still winter. So the wax, like wax in a candle, is more opaque when it's cold. So if I was to leave this in the sun, it would melt a little bit and all of these wrinkles would disappear. Okay? So wax canvas is commercially sold, and by commercially I mean if you buy it online, by the weight that either after it's been waxed or before it's been waxed. So I know I'm going to dig into that because that actually is a big thing that makes it hard for people to understand how thick the fabric is. So let's go and look at a few other thicknesses. So this is a 12-ounce waxed weight fabric. If you go and look at the wax canvas on our website, you'll see that every color has the ounce in the title. And the way that we sell wax canvas is with the waxed weight. That is not universal. There are some places where you can buy wax canvas and they advertise the non-waxed weight. Okay, so we can talk more about that if you want. But this is bone here, and this is an 11-ounce. Okay, so 11-ounce waxed canvas, waxed weight. Okay, this is burgundy. Okay, so I just want you to see if you can see any of the differences is all. And they're all pretty similar, okay? So this is also an 11-ounce. But let's go over here to sage. Now, I bet you can already tell just from the way that I'm handling this fabric and the drape that this is thinner. Yeah, so this is a 10-ounce waxed weight, okay? So thinner fabric is not going to have as much structure, right? That's anybody who's sewn anything knows that. Okay, so here are the weights that we usually work with. So all the wax is a combination of oil and wax. Let's just put these aside and I'll talk about sage here. So this is just a regular canvas, and honestly, I don't have all of the non-waxed weights committed to memory because I sell them as waxed weights, but I would say that the non-waxed weight of this is probably like 7 ounces, 7 to 8 ounces, right? Which is probably the common canvas that you'll see at like your local fabric store, right? But when it gets waxed, it gets more structure and it gets heavier. Right? So that's sort of how the idea of that. So let me jump back on over here. Okay. So it's not standardized the way that it's sold. So if you go to, I don't know, there's a ton of people that sell wax canvas, but if you go to one website, you're going to want to look at the details and see, are they selling it as waxed weight or non-waxed weight? Now, we like to sell it as waxed weight because that's the way that it arrives to you. That's the weight that it behaves at, right? So in sewing, we talk a lot about how fabric behaves. So is it slippery? What is the drape like? You know, well, with wax canvas, because it's waxed, it actually holds its shape really well. And it makes it a really great beginner bag making fabric, because as you're learning how to sew, one of the things you're learning how to do is control the fabric at the machine to get the stitch to go where you want it to go. Wax canvas stays put because it's kind of tacky, okay? And that tackiness, it sometimes will build up in your feed dog over time, but I would teach probably like 3 months of classes before we would clean our feed dog or our machines, but I get that question all the time, so that's why I wanted to mention it. It's never ruined any of my machines. It is oil, which, you know, machinery tends to want oil, metal moving parts. We do have a blog post on our blog of how to clean wax from your machine, and I'll have Anna link that. So let me jump back and show you, because of the wax, you can't iron wax canvas, but that's actually a blessing in disguise because you don't have to iron it because you can finger press it or roll it. So let me show you how that works. So this is the steel fabric roller. It's just a really heavy fabric roller, and I love to use it to press wax canvas. So I'll go ahead and do a hem here, and I'm just gonna roll this along. And you can see how flat this is. It just gets totally smashed by the roller. And then when I open this, see that crisp line that happens on the canvas there because of the wax? So you can do all your hems and all your fabric prepping just at the table instead of having to go turn on the iron. So look how flat that gets. Like, it's crazy, right? So another way that I really like to prep and fold is with the bone folder. So if you do any sort of like scrapbooking or other types of crafts, you might have, or even sewing and garment sewing, use the harem marker a lot. It's similar, you know, it's basically just a folding tool. But I absolutely love this as a way to press, and it's a way to mark your wax canvas. So look at that line. It looks like I literally used a piece of chalk, but I didn't, I just marked it. So wax canvas can be like, the way of working with it can feel really flowy because you don't have to go find a bunch of things. Like I can use the same tool to mark this as I do to fold it and finger press it, you know? So it tends to make it a little faster and you're sort of like in that mode of making right there. Okay, so let me go back up here. Sorry, got confused there about what camera I was going to. So wax canvas can be really fun to work with in that sense, and it's totally different than any other type of heavy duty fabric. Now, heavy duty fabrics, a lot of times are synthetics. I like to work mostly with natural fibers. So as a bag designer, I like to combine natural materials. So leather, metal, wax canvas, canvas. In my previous life, professional life, I made bike messenger bags, and we actually used all synthetics. And we used heavy duty fabrics with that. So I used Cordura, ballistic nylon, 12-ounce vinyl, nylon buckles, polypropylene webbing. So for any of you out there listening or watching that work with synthetics, those will sound familiar. So that's kind of the main things I wanted to cover with wax canvas. And I just love sewing with it, and I think it's really great for bag making. So I wanted to share sort of the basics with you all about it because I know it can be a pretty new material to work with. So you can drop some questions in chat about it that I can get to at the end. Hopefully Anna can reiterate them to me if they get too lost in the chat. All right, so I'm going to transition a little, and I'm going to talk about leather now because we're already half an hour in almost, and I want to make sure I get to that. So let's start by, I have a half-made Portsmouth tote here. And let me refresh your memory here about the Portsmouth. This is our beginner pattern. And I just happen to have one half made because I just taught a bunch of Portsmouth classes at Sew Expo. Okay, so you do all the sewing, and this is true for a lot of our bag patterns, is you do a lot of sewing and then you attach the leather at the end. And the leather is attached with rivets, and the fabric is sandwiched between two pieces of leather, a leather washer and a leather strap, okay? So I'm gonna just put this aside for a second and talk a little bit about leather straps. So I'm gonna pop this rivet out. Let's switch cameras again. So this isn't set because I was teaching, so it's easy for me to show. Okay. So this is a leather that's 5 to 7 ounces. Okay, I know we're talking a lot of like measurements in this class. And it's chrome tanned, okay? And let me go ahead and pull another kind of leather out. Let me pull these over here. So here we go. This is a vegetable tanned leather. This is just a scrap from when we were clicking straps. And this is an English bridal leather. And this is the other type of leather that we use on bags. So we tend to use an 8 to 10 ounce English bridal vegetable tanned leather or a 5 to 7 ounce chrome tanned leather. And chrome tanned leather is a little bit thinner and more supple than vegetable tanned leather at first. Now, vegetable tanned leather wears in and becomes softer over time. So I wanted to give you this close-up of these two leathers. Now I'm actually going to bring some bags on camera and show you why we use those types of leathers. So first of all, let's look at the NATO, okay? So the NATO is a bucket bag. It has a bunch of pockets on the outside, and then there's a bunch of pockets inside of it too. Okay, let me see, there you go. And we use a 8 to 10 ounce vegetable tanned leather on this, okay? It's classified as English bridal leather because a lot of leather comes from the saddle making or equestrian heritage, essentially. The same way that industrial sewing comes from sail making heritage, for that matter. So there's always that lineage from in the craft, right? So straps, first of all, let's start here. We're really looking at how do we want them to function? How do we want them to behave? So let me back up just a little because I really like to teach foundational concepts. When we're making a bag, we want it to be durable. We want it to stand the test of time. We want it to function easily. We want it to keep our stuff safe and a little bit dry in the case of wax canvas because it's water resistant. We want it to be easy to use. We don't want it to fall off our shoulders, right? And we want it to feel good in our hands, right? We want it to carry our everyday things, okay? So a bag is not functional if the strap breaks. A bag is not functional if the pocket stitch breaks or whatever, so on and so forth. So for straps, what we want is we want it to be really strong and durable, especially at the attachment points. So we don't want the strap to be stretchy. We don't usually use knit or stretchy fabric with bag making. And so I like to use English bridal vegetable tanned leather for the NATO, primarily because the strap pulls out of the bag right here. So it's really hard for me to talk about leather without veering into talking about rivets and hardware because they go so hand in hand. So essentially, there's tubular rivets on this bag, and I'll talk a little bit about the differences between tubular rivets and double cap rivets in a little bit. But essentially, since there's tubular rivets on this bag, it has 8 to 10 ounce vegetable tanned English bridal leather. If I was using double cap rivets, I would maybe use the chrome tanned leather, okay? So these aren't hard and fast rules, but what I'm always looking for is to make the most durable bag, right? So bags usually fail at the strap attachment points. So that's really what we want to pay attention to. So English bridal is a type of leather used for bridals, and it's vegetable tanned, meaning that it's the tanning process is vegetable oils. Chrome tanned is a little more chemical, not as sustainable, and it uses more chemicals in the tanning process, which results in a more supple leather, right? So a lot of garment weight leather, which is leather that's about anywhere from a little below 1 ounce up to, probably 5 ounces even possibly. A lot of times that is mostly chrome tan leather, and that's because it is a lot more supple. It will, the only example I have here is my scrap piece from when we were cutting washers out. But it is a little more bendy, a little more supple, a little more soft, okay? When we talk about the weight of leather, it is the thickness, right? So I'm not going to get super technical about leather because this isn't a leather class. I'm going to stay a little more general, a little more layperson, but essentially we want straps that aren't too thin because thinner straps won't be as durable. We want straps that are like really stable. So thinner leather tends to be more stretchy. Thicker leather tends to be more durable and not as stretchy. We want it to keep its integrity, right? 8 to 10 ounce leather is a little bit thicker than 5 to 7 ounce leather, okay? There is certain millimeters that correspond with those weights, like the thicknesses. I can't tell you them off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is I tend to not want to make straps from leather that is thinner than 5 ounces. And I don't tend to make straps from leather that is thicker than 10 ounces. Now, if we're talking about sewing leather on your bags, because I know some of you are thinking that, just keep in mind that whenever you're sewing something, you're sewing more than one layer. So if you think you can sew maybe through 5 ounces, then you would need to get like a 1 to 2 ounce or 3 ounce leather, because usually you're sewing one thing to another. If you know you're going to go over 4 layers of leather, then you need to pay attention to that. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but I wanted to speak to that because I get that question a lot. So in order for us to sew these bags on a home sewing machine and use the durable, good leather that we want to use to make a durable bag that will last, we have to attach the leather with something that isn't the sewing machine, because it won't go through the 10 ounces of leather. And if it does, the stitch will not be that great, because the machine will have trouble keeping optimal tension and timing through a material that is that dense and thick, right? So now we're kind of thinking back to what I was talking about at the beginning and understanding how those work together. Okay, so let's talk about rivets. Let me pull, this is going to be like just a bunch of material by the end here. Let me change this over. Okay, so I know we're like rapid fire learning right now. It's fun though, right? Okay, so I have 2 kinds of rivets here. I have a tubular rivet. Let me move this so you guys don't get too distracted. And I also have a double cap rivet. Now, what's the first thing that you notice about these is a double cap rivet has two parts, excuse me. It has a rivet stem and a rivet cap. This is one rivet, okay? This is the most common rivet that you think of if you're coming from the sewing world when you think about rivets, is a double cap rivet. So that's what you saw on the Portsmouth tote here. A double cap rivet looks like a rivet cap on both sides, okay? So that's the 2 parts. The other kind of rivet is a tubular rivet, and that only has 1 part. Tubular rivets are stronger than double cap rivets because of the way that you set them. So you can see a set tubular rivet here on this NATO. So this is what the inside of the rivet looks like. I know everything's black, but hopefully you could see that. There, see how it looks like a metal flower almost? And then this is what the top looks like, which I should have picked something that's not so, that has more contrast, but hopefully you can see that. So that is the outside, that's the cap, and then that's the set part. Now, tubular rivets are really strong when the force exerting on them is more of a pulling force. Now, I'm not going to get into like super techie physics terminology. I'm just going to like talk about this casually. But essentially, you want the attachment point of the leather to the canvas to be really strong, right? Well, if the force is being pulled on the leather is a pulling force, like down here, actually, let me pull the Slabtown backpack up for you. Oh, let's look at the Maywood because I see where it is, so it's easier. Okay, so here is a backpack with a buckle, right? So let me take the strap out of the buckle. Okay, so if you're wearing this backpack and it's on your body, you know, it's essentially doing this. pulling out, right? And then your body's here, here's the bag, and here's the buckle, okay? I mean, everyone knows just from growing up wearing JanSport backpacks that where's the first place on a bag that breaks? The bottom corners where the buckles are attached or the straps are attached, okay? So in order to make this a really strong attachment point, we use tubular rivets, okay? When you're exerting that type of force on a double cap rivet, it has the ability to pop the rivet out, right? So, because when you're setting this rivet, these can pop apart. But when you're setting, let me just say that they won't pop apart easily once you've set them, okay? So it will be a strong rivet. But if you're carrying a bunch of weight in your backpack, over time, it could be compromised. Now, it's not a sure thing that it won't work, but if you want to be careful, you should use a tubular rivet on any backpack strap attachment points because it's designed to hold really strongly no matter what when you're exerting a pulling force on it, okay? So you could see that we use tubular rivets here. Now, to set a tubular rivet, you have to use a tubular rivet peening tool. And that is a tool that essentially takes this tube here and creates this shape so the end of the peening tool has like a little shape in it that helps splay this tube open into these like almost flower petals, I like to call them, metal flower petals, okay? I think Anna threw a link in chat so you could see what I mean by that tool. Okay, so another thing about really strong attachment points, and you saw this earlier when I was talking about Portsmouth tote, is you want to sandwich the fabric in between two pieces of leather. So you can't see that here, but on this two attachment points here, these two rivets that are attaching this buckle strap, there's a piece of leather on the other side of this, and it's sandwiched in there, okay? So like the same way that you saw that on the Portsmouth tote is the same thing happening on any rivet attachment point on any bag, at least any bag that I design and teach you, okay? So this is the leather strap on the outside of the bag. And then this is a leather washer on the inside of the bag. Now you could just as easily just cut a rectangle out of leather here and punch two holes in it and have a really strong attachment point. But the idea is that over time, if I went and attached this strap here to the bag and I only used a rivet and a rivet cap, over time, this metal rivet will wear into this fabric and cut through it. It will not last. The only way to get that attachment point to last is to sandwich your fabric between two pieces of leather. Then it will be strong and durable and it won't be the place where the bag fails. Okay, so I just realized this is a great teaching point about leather and rivets and how to pair them correctly. Let me check my time. Okay, I know I have a lot I want to go over, but I think this is a really important thing to talk about because it's something that a lot of people is new to a lot of people. When you're attaching rivets to your bag with leather, you need to pair the thickness of the work, whatever you're attaching, with the length of the rivet stem, okay? So what you ideally want is you want the rivet stem to be sticking up above the thickness of your work by at least a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. If your stem is sticking up too far, that is how the rivet will set crooked. That is what causes the rivet to set crooked. Now, a lot of people think, oh, it's because I'm hitting it wrong. it's actually not because you're hitting it wrong entirely, right? So there might be some technique there, but most of us have used a hammer, right? The main thing that's happening is that if the stem is sticking up too high, then you go to set your rivet, the stem just kicks crooked, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, like it just goes to the side, and then you get not as strong of an attachment point. But if you're able to actually match the length of the stem with the thickness of the work that you're setting, then it is a stronger set. So when we are setting a rivet, any rivet, double cap or tubular, essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to smash the stem into sort of like a mushroom shape almost into the cap. So you know how I was showing you all what it looks like on the back of a tubular rivet, like that flower shape? Imagine a similar thing, I'm like, where's the camera? A similar thing happening inside the stem of a double cap rivet. It just doesn't break open into like these 6 flower petals, but it still creates like a mushroom shape and it locks into the cap, right? So we're trying to smash the rivet stem. Oh, there's too many things on camera. We're trying to smash the rivet stem so that it makes this sort of like mushroom shape, and that's into the cap, and that's what makes a strong set. And you can't do it if it's not matching the rivet and the leather. Let me just check. Anna's sending me a message here. Okay, great. Yay. All right, so let me talk a little bit more and then I want to do Q&A. This is a large rivet compared to a medium rivet, and I'm sorry it's hard to get a good angle on these so that you all can see it. But essentially, and you could see it if Anna puts a link in there, you can see them a little bit on our site, but I'm trying to hold them. But essentially, the medium rivet has a shorter stem than the large rivet. So for this particular project, like if I'm attaching the leather strap to my Portsmouth tote, say I go and pick up a large rivet, I'm just going to put it in there, put it in here, put this on, and then I'm going to look at it. Now to me, I don't know if y'all could see that, but that stem is definitely sticking up more than 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch from the bulk of my work. And when I say the bulk of my work, I mean everything I'm trying to rivet together, right? So to me, I would say I'm using too long of a rivet. So large would be too long of a rivet. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule. And we are talking about just if you're setting a rivet with a hammer or a rivet setter. If you have an industrial hand press, those tend to set rivets a lot straighter. That's just a more, industrial tool. So you could use a small rivet, but again, it might be too short and then you don't have enough of the rivet stem left to make that mushroom shape to set the rivet correctly. Okay, let me jump back on camera. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that demystifies a little bit about rivets and fabric and leather, okay? There's so much more I want to tell you about this because these are really the foundational things for how we do heavy-duty, professional-looking bags on home sewing machines. Rivets, leather, canvas, around to hear about that. Let's go ahead and answer some questions for a few minutes. See what folks are looking at. Okay. I'm just going to go and see what Anna is saying. Stacy asks, I live in Florida. How does wax canvas hold up? Will the wax melt off while I carry the bag around? Will the wax come off on our clothes? Yeah, so I get that question a lot. And from what I've heard, because I have people that buy my wax canvas from all over the country, I haven't heard anybody say that, and I haven't had that experience myself. Now, I don't wear a lot of white, so probably if you laid the bag on a white coat on the back seat in your car in the sun, it might get oily. right? So that's something to keep in mind, but essentially the wax canvas that I work with, it's waxed at the mill. So it's commercially waxed. So the wax is heated up and it's poured over the canvas as the canvas is stretched a lot. So that way the wax really gets into the fibers, right? And it's a wax and oil blend. It's actually a sustainable food grade wax, which is great. I love the mills that we work with. And but I can't speak to if you wax your own fabric, because I think if you wax your own fabric, the wax tends to sit more on the surface of the fabric. So yes, wax canvas will, the wax will wear off over time. The wax will feel oily, but I haven't seen it stain my clothes before from wearing it. So I hope that helps. All right. How can we combine boiled wool pocket or panel with wax canvas? Height difference, stitch length, tension. Chris, that's a cool question, and I've never worked with boiled wool, so I can't speak to that entirely. But what I can say is that if it doesn't fray, which it probably doesn't, then you don't have to deal with doing hems or whatnot. So it seems like the main concern would be the thickness, how thick it would get as you're sewing it to your wax canvas and sewing it on your machine. So I would take a little bit and test it and see, you know, can my machine sew through this? Can I go through 2 layers of wax canvas and 1 layer of the wool, for instance, you know? I also would wonder about the integrity of the wool. Like if you've sewn with it before, you know, is it really loose? Does it need to be interfaced? What's the attachment point? Because, you know, the stitch might be strong, like the thread might be strong, but if the fabric's not strong, if it's a loose weave, then it's just not gonna hold, right? So I wonder about that too. So it sounds like there might be a little bit of testing that you might need to do to see how those fabrics behave together and sew on your home machine. All right. Oh, Sarah's asking a great question about the thickness of the fabric for the rivet that will be going through it so that you buy the correct size. I know that's a funny one. And I say, when I talk about rivet and leather pairing, it's not a super strong rule in the sense where it will work. Like I was saying, like I probably can set the rivets on the Portsmouth tote that I just showed you with small, medium, and large. But I'm gonna have an easier time setting it correctly if I use the medium, because that's what is matching up the best with the rivet stem. Now, the rivet stems tend to be pretty universal, small, medium, large, but you can get those measurements off the website and it will tell you the length of the stem, or I would say the range of the length of the stem, and then you can measure the thickness of your work, right? But there's, you know, I would say generally we are using medium rivets on most of the bags that we make. And we use small rivets if we're just attaching like the leather zipper pull, for instance. So this is a small rivet. I would use a large rivet if I ended up having very thick fabric, or I was using extra thick leather. I would need that longer rivet to get through it. Now you can, like, I know you don't wanna find yourself at the step where you're attaching your rivet only to find out that you have the wrong size. So I definitely buy a variety and use them on your projects, because as you build your bag making studio out, you might be doing a project where you're like, oh, I need a small rivet. I got one over here, let me go grab it. It gives you a little more flexibility in your making process. Okay, and of course, if you buy any sort of kit, leather and hardware kit, or any kit off our site, we've already paired those for you. We've already made those choices, right? So let's see here. In addition to the rivets themselves, do you need a special tool to punch the holes? Oh my gosh, Rachel, let's talk about that. I know, I was so worried about running out of time. Well, hopefully you all can stay on, but yes, let's talk about punching holes. So let me change my camera over so you can see my work surface again. So as you can tell, or maybe you can't because of the lighting, there is holes in the fabric, right? So you need to punch holes in your fabric in order to put rivets through them, because literally you won't be able to set a rivet if you don't have a hole in your fabric. So my favorite way to punch holes in fabric is using a punching board and a mallet and a 3/32 drive punch, okay? So out of the 3 tools that I just brought on camera, it's probably the drive punch that you haven't worked with or is fairly new to you. So let's talk about those. So a drive punch is literally a hole punch that is a certain diameter, and that's the measurement of the drive punch. So this is a 3/32, meaning that it has a 3/32 hole, or punches a 3/32 hole. And this is a 1/8, which is the other one we commonly use, and that punches a 1/8 hole. So we can pull, just pull this piece of sage over. So if I needed to punch a hole in this, let's go ahead and use the 3/32 because that's the one I commonly use for fabric, and then I'll use the 1/8 inch for leather. And so I have to make sure that I have a punching board underneath and that I'm hitting my metal tool with a mallet as opposed to a hammer, and that's not a hard and fast rule, but you will make your metal tools last longer if you use a mallet on them instead of a hammer, because it doesn't deform the actual tool. So then I'm just going to actually hold some pressure on here and make sure that I'm holding my tool vertically aligned with the work, and then I can go ahead and punch a hole through it, okay? So that would work even if I'm trying to punch a hole through 3 layers. I can still do it, okay? So drive punches are my favorite way to punch holes because you can get a hole kind of anywhere you want on the fabric. There are a few other ways to punch holes, like there are rotary punches where basically there's all these different sizes of drive punches on that tool, but it tends to only reach a few inches into your work, and drive punches are a little more versatile. So in order to punch holes, you need some sort of cutting board surface, and notice this cutting board is a little thicker than the regular cutting mat that you would have in your sewing studio that you would use with the rotary cutter. So this is a poly punching board. I can have Anna put a link if she hasn't already in chat. I think it's like $7 or something. And this is a Bakelite mallet. So let's talk for a second about mallets. This is one of my favorite mallets. Because it has a pretty hard head that's kind of large, so you can strike it in a lot of places and not miss the tool or the rivet that you're striking. And also, it transfers the force really well of your blow. So as opposed to a rubber mallet, which actually will absolutely not work for setting tubular rivets, it's actually one of the most common customer service questions that me and Anna get is people that are having a hard time setting their tubular rivets. And that's because they're using the wrong mallet a lot of times. And I don't want to regress into this because I know I'm running out of time, but in order to set this, you need to be on a hard surface like a stone slab. Okay, so we go over a stone slab, and that's where you would set the rivet. Whereas if you were cutting a hole in fabric, you would use a cutting board, the same way that you wouldn't use your really nice kitchen knives on your granite countertop. You would use a cutting board because this is a cutting tool. Okay, so I'm really glad you brought up that question because I did want to talk about that. I didn't want to skip over that. So that's a major part of attaching hardware to your bag. So let's go ahead and go back up here. So if I punch canvas that is not wax canvas, do I need to use fray check? That is a great question, Sarah. I wouldn't normally use fray check if I'm punching fabric that's not wax canvas, because every time I punch a hole in fabric, I'm attaching a leather strap to it, generally with a leather washer on the back, or just the double cap rivets sometimes. Like in our woodland DOP kit, we don't use the leather on the inside of the rivet, and that's because you're not actually carrying a really heavy bag with on that strap, on the little pull strap that you put on the side. One of the reasons that I use a really small drive punch, so the 3/32 is one of the smallest ones you can use, is I want to punch the smallest hole possible. And honestly, you can, if you have an awl in your sewing kit and you only have a few layers of fabric to go through, you can totally use an awl to put a hole in your fabric too. Okay, so I'm just reading, see if there's any other questions in chat that I have a second to get to. On your website for the leather straps toolkit, the end punch sizes are 3/4, 1 1/2. What is the, oh, that's a good question, Heidi. So you're referring to a round end punch, which is different than a drive punch. So I just want to make sure that there's some clarity there. A drive punch makes a hole in the fabric, and a round end punch creates a round end on the end of the fabric. So, so like right here, this rounded edge is with a round end punch. And you would have to, since this is a 3/4 inch strap, you would want to use a 3/4 inch round end punch. If this was a 1 inch strap, you'd want to use a 1 inch round end punch. Or you could use the 1.5 inches and it would just be not quite as round. So I hope that helps there. Okay. So to answer your question, the best size to get is the size that you know you would be making a lot of straps with that width of leather. We tend to do 3/4 inch for most of the straps that I design on my bags, but like the Fremont tote here, it has a crossbody strap that's 1 inch. So in that case, you would use a 1 inch round end punch to make that strap. Now you don't have to use a round end punch to cut leather. You can just use a rotary cutter, okay? So it would just cut a straight line or an angled line, and that's fine too. We just think it looks a little bit more professional if you use a round end punch, and then you would use that on a cutting board with a mallet because it's a cutting tool, okay? You see a theme emerge. Okay. Well, I've kept you all a little longer than I said I would, so I hope that folks got something out of this. Was a crash course in wax canvas, leather, and rivets. And I just wanted to take a moment to demystify some of the materials that we make bags with and how we get really nice professional results. Thank you so much and have a good night. Bye, everyone.